Hello, Mental Growth Network. Today is our new podcast, and we still continuing to digging up in this burnout topic, burnout and work. And today we have a podcast with same idea, but we go more deep on project management. Overlap, overwork, overload. Project management without burnout. This is the name of our podcast, and we invited Katie Bray. Katie Bray is fractional COO, and she have amazing focus in neuroscience and regulating our nervous system. So, hello, Katie.
Hi.
Could you please present a little bit more yourself? Tell about you. How did you come to this fractional CO role, operations, and how did you manage to connect it to our nervous system?
Yeah, of course. So I've always been in operations roles. I was working in creative agencies as operations lead, most recently fractionally, so for multiple different clients in a few different areas, always as head of operations or COO or some kind of operations leadership. But what I realized is every founder or leadership team that I'm working with has a problem outside of their operations, which is their stress management and their own personal nervous system regulation, as in it's dysregulated. And unfortunately, if people don't understand how to regulate that themselves, if they don't have the knowledge and the tools and the practices in place to manage this system, then no matter what other structures and systems and frameworks you put in place for the business is still at risk because the founder is at risk or the leaders are at risk of burnout or chronic stress. So I have done a lot of self-education and deep research, and through my own personal journey and studies have come to understand how we can regulate our own internal operating system, which is a nervous system. So I'm now, as you said, interweaving both the operating system of a business with the internal operating system of the founder and the leadership team to make sure that the business can grow operationally, but also the founder has the capacity to lead the business to where it needs to go.
Thank you. And let's start a little bit discussing our topic. So, uh, before we will go how to heal it, let's talk about overload. So, what are the third signs of team overload you can spot as a COO or a project lead?
I think a major indicator can be disengagement. So, for example, if you have team members that are usually very engaged, very active, always, on the ball, hitting their deadlines, pushing the project forward, or even just if they're, you know, a team player that's active on Slack or commenting on threads or something like this. If you see this drop, that can be a sign that somebody is under stress or on the verge of burning out. Not always. And I'm also not saying that that's wrong. I mean, of course, we don't all have to be active every single day, and not everybody's like that anyway. And we go through cycles. But I think that can be, and especially in my experience, that can be a very good indicator when somebody just starts to drop off. Normally, they pop in every morning and say, "Good morning" on Slack, or normally they're the first ones to I don't know, comment on a thread or maybe check in on somebody else. When that starts to visibly drop off, for me, in my experience, that has been a sign that actually digging deeper, that can be a sign that somebody is going into stress, maybe coming up to their tolerance level, maybe starting to burn out. I think as well, if performance might drop, but if something's quite out of character for a high performer, for example, and then performance might drop, or if somebody seems visibly tired, either visibly in if you get in on meetings with them, but also if they're just mentioning, oh, I didn't sleep well, or I'm feeling tired this morning. These can all be signs that maybe somebody's lifestyle and their habits have changed slightly, and they can all be signs of stress or leading to burnout.
And to how to notice this if you are a leader? Because we now discuss how to notice it with other team players, but how to notice it within yourself.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think awareness of our own triggers is the first step in understanding how to regulate our own nervous system. Because a lot of the time we think of things of that's just how I am. Or, for example, I think a great one is like if you're snapping at your team, for example, as a leader, You might even brush that under the carpet as, well, that's just how I am, or it's a personality trait, or everyone is actually annoying me today. But it's actually probably more of the fact that you are getting towards your window of tolerance, and it could be that you just can't cope with the way that you're perceiving people are acting. It's out of character for you to start snapping. Maybe your moods are changing. Maybe you're noticing that your team are a little bit hesitant to come and talk to you, perhaps, or your team are maybe unsure of the mood that you're going to turn up to the meeting in. These are all things that can be signs that you're getting overly stressed out, and not necessarily signs that the world is just annoying you. Again, coming back to sleep patterns, I think sleep's one of the most important health hacks, if you want to call it that, and a great way to make sure that your nervous system is regulated. And when you're missing sleep, or when sleep isn't as deep or restorative as it should be, this can be a sign of burnout or chronic stress. And then, of course, that's a vicious cycle of you're not sleeping, so you feel more stressed. So you're doing the things that bring on more stress. You're not sleeping because of those things. So I think even changes in your own like eating habits, like the podcast that you did recently, things like changes in your own personal lifestyle. You're not feeling like you want to be as social anymore. Have your eating habits changed? Are you snapping at your team? Are you feeling disengaged yourself? These are all things where, I mean, obviously there's many, it's very nuanced, but I think especially as a founder or a leader that's passionate about their team and passionate about their projects, if you start to feeling yourself disengaged, or start to feeling that you couldn't really care less at this stage, it might be time to dig deeper into that and maybe look into some tools and techniques of how you could maybe manage your own stress, because chances are you do still have the passion and the joy somewhere, but it's been buried and suppressed down because of stress.
Yeah, this is a quite interesting topic because due to my life, I was working in several startups, and I had a lot of friends and in VC and startup. And I also noticed that so many times people were so inspired. They were waking up full of energy, and they were telling about every meeting how like it's amazing and that they can't meet and they need to do things. And then at some point, this become maybe I wouldn't say addiction, but something like as if they forget about some other simple life pleasures. And at some point, they go so deep with this passion that this passion start having opposite effect. Before, this passion gave them energy, gave them power, and now this passion just make them empty. And in this empty state, they will say, "Oh, I really think this is not my idea. This is what no was not really interesting. Startup from the beginning, I thought so, but when I was really start opening, like working in that, so this is I understand it's a tricky question, but really, how to define? Is it like really not your thing, or it just you're in burnout condition?
Yeah, it is a tricky question. And I think that's where it comes back to I really am a big believer in getting to know yourself and giving yourself space and grace to go through these cycles, because we are cyclical beings and there are cycles of life. And we're not always going to be cheering or enthusiastic. Of course, there's cycles of life when we're not at that high stage, and it doesn't mean we're burnt out, and it doesn't mean that we hate our business anymore. But giving ourselves grace and space, and really having a self-inquiry to understand, is this a pattern that I've seen before that comes along with maybe the cycles of the seasons, or maybe the cycles of something else that I'm going through in my life? Or has this been a pressing feeling that I can't seem to get out of, no matter what I do, no matter what habits I change, or no matter which tools I use from my toolbox to regulate myself, I'm still there and I'm still in this space that I can't seem to get out of. And then I think it would be time to question, is this perhaps burnout and it needs more serious attention, or is this perhaps something that I'm not in anymore? And of course, none of us are here to push people to stay in a business that they've outgrown or that they don't want. That's another thing that I see with founders quite a lot as well. But again, I think it's like a fine line, and the way to navigate that is to really, really, really know yourself and trust yourself.
Yeah, developing self-awareness and asking yourself questions, even in the times when you are high and when you low, yes, you still try to develop your awareness in both states, and then you can compare your condition.
Yeah.
My question is still about this idea of how to measure if your team is in this condition or if you are in that, and maybe they react on you, as you said. Some of the team players not really like video calls, and some of them are okay. Some of them okay, they more like positive to meet everyone. This can be a sign that team is like less likely to have a video calls. It's sign of kind of burnout of members, or it's not really connected.
You're asking me if people don't want to put their video on, is it a sign of burnout?
Yes,
I don't
and
think
overload.
I don't think that we could diagnose that as a sign of burnout. Um, I think people are entitled not to put their video on if they don't want to. I think the key is, like we said earlier, is it different to what they normally do? If it's somebody who always has their video on and is always first on the call and is always very animated, and now all of a sudden they're always 3 minutes late to the call and they don't put their video on anymore and they don't really contribute, I would probably be trying to have a deeper conversation with that person. And it's not to berate them. And it's not to say that you're wrong for doing these things. It's to say what's going on with you, because it's a change in character. It's different from how you normally behave. So are you okay? Is there anything that's happened in this situation that's now making you change your actions and the way that you show up? And then that could lead to deeper conversations. I don't think we could say your camera's off, you're burnt out, or your camera's off, you're wrong. I think it needs to open up a line of inquiry, especially if the actions that are happening now are different to the usual characteristics that we've seen.
And if we going back to operation side in the way of performance and making it better, yes. What is the real difference between pushing that performance and creating burnout for team players?
I think the thing is, we have, again, going back to the cyclical thing, we have a stress cycle. That's how our nervous system works. Our nervous system is meant to keep us alive. Stress is okay as long as it's manageable and we complete these stress cycles. So you have a perceived threat. Your sympathetic nervous system is activated. You release the stress hormones. You all unessential functions are shut down. You're getting ready to take action. You know how it works. Then, once the perceived threat is non-existent anymore, you go into the parasympathetic stage and you start to release relaxing hormones, and digestion comes back online, for example, and you start to go through restorative processes that bring you back to homeostasis, into balance. That I personally believe burnout happens when we never get to that second stage. So we're always going into activated, and that can be from things like constant deadlines, especially in the startup world, constant deadlines with no time to rest, constant meetings, like out of one video call into another, constant goals that you never meet, or even if you do meet, there's never like a reflection process. There's never like a looking back and seeing what progress you've made. It's just an always on button. So I think that's where burnout comes from, when we never get to complete that stress cycle. I think, on the other hand, pushing for performance is knowing the end goal. So always having the end goal in mind and then doing your absolute best to get there, but understanding when is the time to stop. Like, it would be impossible to say you're always going to hit 100% of 100% of your goals. So I think pushing for performance is knowing what needs to be done and then doing your utmost to get there, but then having some boundaries or parameters or frameworks or whatever in place that say this is as far as we can go, and we now need to close that loop almost and move on to the next thing, for example, or see why it didn't work and see why it did work, but to keep pushing without understanding that. I think burnout comes from people thinking that they're not good enough, or they haven't done enough, or there's no time to rest, for example. Whereas pushing for performance is, like I've just said, the thing where you do your utmost, but you know that there's a certain thing that you're trying to get to, and you're trying to get there as much as you can. But you either get there or you don't, essentially. And I think that's the difference.
I would say that from my experience, I also worked in different operational system and leaders, and myself, I was a leader, different role. And I noticed that even when you use, for example, Scrum methodology, where you have kind of clear sprints and you have clear goals, yes, you don't have this feeling that tasks are never ending, because this feeling of never ending tasks, this is already make you a little bit stressed. It's like you always need to do the specific thing. That's why if you have this opening ritual and closing ritual, and this really helps you. But same time, I think it's also important to measure the success. As you said, is like if you try to, when you close the task, you try to understand where, how important, what is was it for the overall project, what is this a small piece and like a bigger picture, and if you have it all together, you really feel that you work on the mainstream, no, on the whole picture of the system. My next question will be for you. How to close these things? Like there are too many things we are doing, how to close them correctly, how to not be because some people say, again from my experience, there are too many like rituals in Scrum, like for example there are like so many things you do, and when we will work, so how to do some simple closing things that really need to be closed, and how to close, yes, and then how, no, can you tell about this more deeply?
Okay, so the first thing I think is does what does done look like? Okay, like everything has to have an end goal, in my opinion, and everything should link up to a bigger picture goal, because otherwise, what on earth are we all here for, work wise, of course? So, what's the bigger picture vision that we're all working towards? And then everything that we're working on in the day to day should somehow link up to that. It might be a few steps removed, depending on which team it is that's working on it, but everything should link up to that. And it should be very clear how it links up to that. Then it's about goal setting. So, you might use quarterly goal setting, you might use OKRs, you might use rocks, whatever methodology it is that you're using, it has to be a very, very tangible end point. You have to be able to say, did we do it? Yes or no? And to be honest, I don't think it needs to be any more complicated than that. Some of these goal frameworks and methodologies, they do try to make it a little bit more complicated than that. But in my opinion, it's like, can you say very clearly, did we do it? Yes or no? And then, of course, there would be a measure. It's not just yes or no. It's like if you wanted to improve something by what amount, you got it from this number to this number. So, of course, there's variations in that. But can you clearly say, did we do it? Yes or no? And what that means, what does success look like? What does done look like? How can you know whether you've done a thing or not, unless you can say whether very clearly what does done look like? So I think that's how I close the loops. This is my goal. This is the reason that it's my goal, because it links into this other goal. And then in the time frame that I'm giving myself, did I get it done or not? And if the answer is yes, then great. And if the answer is like 75 or 80% of the way there, then I mean, it's also a pretty good success. And you can perhaps, there's some loose ends to tie up next quarter. And if it's a no, then what happened? Was it an unrealistic goal that you set in the first place? Was it not actually matching up to a bigger picture goal? So therefore, none of the team put any intention on it. Nobody really understood why you were doing it. I think the key here in closing loops is to be very intentional with the expectations in the first place. So be very clear on what the goal is and what done looks like, and then give yourself that limit of time or a result or whatever it is, and then just very clearly say, did I do it? Yes or no? And then have that like have that retrospective, have that reflection time, have a look at what worked and what didn't work, and then simply close that loop. It has to be closed. It has to be closed physically, and it needs to be closed in your head. It really does.
Thank you. About the you just mentioned unrealistic expectation. How do poor timelines and unrealistic expectation can break a team? Is it possible that it can affect so deeply that it even breaking a team?
I think that, yes, it is possible. And the problem can come from a team might constantly say yes. This could be a problem. The manager or the manager's manager, whoever it is, if it's not the team making the decision on whether you can take a project or not, or whether you can, which deadlines you can set or not, then yes, it can break a team. And unfortunately, the team actually delivering on the work and executing, it could be, for example, that they don't push back. They don't feel comfortable pushing back to their manager or their manager's manager. So they agree to all of these deadlines because they don't want to let the team down. They don't want to let the company down. They want to do everything that's asked of them. So they don't say no. They don't say they're overworked. And they just push through for fear of, not being good enough again. This can break a team. A second thing that can break a team is this middle management level. If a middle manager isn't having the capabilities or trained on delegation, on resource management, on saying no and setting boundaries, on managing their team, they could be a bottleneck or even a team breaker because they want to keep their team happy. So, perhaps they're even mucking in and doing some of the work, and then they themselves are getting overworked, but they also want to keep their manager happy, and perhaps their manager is the one that's setting the deadlines or setting the goals and expecting the things from them. And it's a really tricky situation for this person to be in if they don't have the skills or the training or the capabilities to stand in the middle and make sure they're protecting their team whilst also doing what's best for the business. So they might be trying to keep their team happy by selling their team, it's fine, we can do this, or I'll muck in and I'll help you do it. But they're trying to keep their boss happy, and they're not pushing back on their boss and saying, I'm sorry, I need to protect my team here. There's no way that we can meet that deadline. There's kind of this middle ground where it's a very, I think, undertrained and underestimated role that can lead to a team breaking, because then a lot of the time the team crumbles from within, but no one outside of that team realizes the drama that's happening. Everyone outside of that team thinks that team's absolutely fine and it's being managed by the manager, but the manager is actually not managing it correctly, and inside the team is breaking a lot of the time because of unrealistic deadlines and expectations.
How can we structure roles to avoid double work and hidden responsibilities?
I think role structure or roles and responsibilities are one of the key things that a company needs to get clear from the beginning. Well, from the beginning of when it's at a certain level of organization. A clear and transparent organization chart is key to everybody rowing in the same direction, everybody being on board and being able to really do as much as they can in their role and then ask for help from another role when they need it. What that means is, excuse me, again, roles that tie into the bigger picture. Does somebody know how their role fits in the organization chart? Does somebody know how their role has an impact on what the company is actually trying to achieve? So I think, to answer your question more specifically, to stop double work or duplication, it's simply just to have very clear roles and responsibilities. And on top of that, you would have a role scorecard, for example, or like a performance review document or process whereby the roles and responsibilities are very clearly laid out. What is your role? What does that mean is expected of you? How do we measure what's expected of you? And how do we measure for success? And then you assess that. There's a process around giving and receiving feedback around each role. There's a process around understanding where you can ask for help, who you can ask for help from, where some roles might cross over into certain different departments, but they're not actually the same role. So I think it's just, again, about having clear expectations and processes around what the roles mean within the organizational chart.
And is there any way to understand that one person is doing not the role he should supposed to be doing, as it's written in the documents?
Yes, you mean if they're in the wrong, they're not doing it as well as they should, or perhaps they're not the right person for the role.
No, they are doing the things that they supposed to do, and plus they do something extra which is not written in their role.
They're doing too much.
Yes.
So I think it comes back to this performance review process. A performance review should entail assessing the performance, the roles and responsibilities of that set role. And in that document or scorecard or whatever you want to call it, we'll have set out very clear expectations of what's expected in you in that role, and any goals or metrics or KPIs that you work towards. Now, what I would suggest happens is every 3 months or every quarter or maybe every half year, you do an assessment or a meeting between the line manager and the individual contributor, where they both fill out these points on the document or on the scorecard, and they both say, what did you do this quarter that contributed to the business, or what did you do this quarter that, you know, showed that you were doing these parts of your role? And it would really take an honest and transparent conversation for that to come up. You know, like really a manager should be able to see if somebody is overworking. And of course, there's going above and beyond, which some people might say is a value, but it really shouldn't be that you're taking on somebody else's role to do something. You know, like it should be very clear the work that you're doing falls within your own roles and responsibilities. And if you're doing the type of work that isn't listed in your roles and responsibilities, I mean, perhaps it's because the role has evolved, and perhaps the role needs to be updated. The compensation band needs to be updated. I don't know, maybe the org chart itself needs to be updated. But if somebody's doing different parts of a role where that role already exists, we should be able to call out where this is happening. You're actually doing this, which is part of this role, which is great. And thank you. And we appreciate it. But let's make sure that that's not burning you out. Let's make sure that you're getting compensated for it. Let's make sure that you wouldn't actually prefer to be in this other role, perhaps.
Yes, or maybe it's a bit time for you to think otherwise. This other role is more matching you if you're so keen to do it. Sometimes people explore the work that is really good performed during the process. Next question for me will be, what's the most effective way to reset a burnout team without stopping the project?
This is where comes the nervous system tools, techniques. I mean, of course, again, I don't want to be as naive as to say some of these simple things could completely cure a whole team's burnout without having any further repercussions, but there really are some simple daily techniques and practices that you can do to reset yourself, and you could do them as a team. Things like breathing techniques, for example, things like movement techniques, for example. And I would love for every company to start every day, or maybe even every meeting, with this presence moment, you know? So instead of just rushing into every meeting and asking for updates or going around and figuring out what everybody's up to, some simple techniques that create feeling of safety at the start of every day, or at the start of every meeting, or at the start of every project, they really can help. I think another great thing is to look at, if you are really in this situation where the team is burning out and you need to save the project, not looking at the company in teams in terms of silos, but seeing where else can you spread the load perhaps in the company. I think one of the main things that I see in businesses is that their teams are so segregated that one team doesn't know what the other team is doing. And there might be a team over here with people that they have more capacity work-wise, and they have skill sets that can help this team out. Things can be delegated, but because everybody's working in silos, there doesn't seem to be that communication between departments where we can spread the workload or we can help out with some capacity. So I would say things like this, like practical exercises of looking at the team as a whole and not in silos. Where can somebody else relieve some of the burden? Where can tech relieve some of the burden? I mean, have you got anybody doing a process audit, a tech audit? The tech is developing so fast these days. I mean, we all know how you can replace certain things with AI or use one tool to solve them all, or whatever it is. But making sure that somebody is having a check over the workflows and the processes within that team and within that department. And are you really utilizing everybody to the best of their abilities? Or could there be tech that we could use to do certain things to relieve some of the pain and the burden and the stress and the burnout from the team members? So I think just really looking at things from an objective point of view, not just doing things because this is the way it's always been done, go in and audit the workflow, go in and audit the process and see where we can take some burden away because we can give it to tech or we can outsource. And then the practices, the reset buttons, the movement, the present moment before each meeting, the breathing exercises, the meditation. They sound simple, and honestly, some of the companies that I work with, they say, well, we could never do that, it's crazy. But I think, well, actually you could do that because it's just a free tool that we have inside of us and it takes 5 minutes.
Yeah, I can say my experience. I once had a very hard type of job. My project was in US. I was living in Thailand, and this was a really good project. So I decided that I will work for that. And my work was just starting at 2 a.m. at night and finish at 10. When I asked boss to have a 2 hours break in between for a morning sunrise, and I did some my morning, I don't know, meditation, yoga during that time, normal breakfast like human. And even I started to feel myself okay. And one thing that I noticed very clearly that when I started to do small breaks every hour, like just 5 minutes to really do small exercise on breathing or doing some gymnastics or I don't know, push up or whatever, it really helped my body so much digest it because these cycles, what you say of nervous, this is I think where we really very often can't move forward. We
Yeah.
start to do this passion, yes, and it takes us, and we do want more, more, more. And at some point, we're already out of our body, out of our awareness, and we're in this image of our imaginary future, which we will launch with successful thing. It's very
Yeah.
interesting. It's very something, but again, it's good when you can take control it. And when we have our employees, yes, maybe it's also time to understand that neuroscience-based ideas that the project management is not only about yes having good deadline in your CRM and so on, but also understanding how your employees are developing themselves. Yes, and if one of the ideas is that people not trained in the way because nobody trained us this in school, nobody trained us like it's
Yeah.
anywhere. Yes, it's supposed to be that employees should handle them themselves. But in reality, it doesn't happen like that. We should, as a managers, we should employ, we should just accept that employees can't handle this thing themselves. They just
Yeah.
can't. It's not happening. In our imagination, it may be, but in real life, it's not. And the more and more teams have burnout problem, the more teams changing the work. Like it's nowadays for middle specialists, it's normal way to change the company every 2 year. So like what you can do 1 year you invest in your employee to like really find the place and then only 1 year of performance and then he go to another company. One of the ideas because we can't regulate ourselves and we also can't regulate our team. What tools or systems help reduce overwork in the office? Like you mentioned, let's talk about it a little bit more deeper. Something fast, yes, simple. You start about briefing, like what kind of briefing, movement, what kind of moving. You also mentioned retrospective. Can you tell a little bit about each instrument, how can which can help us to reduce this feeling with overwork and burnout and just over?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first tool or system would be goal setting, which we've already touched on a little bit as well. If you're not setting goals and you're just throwing pasta at the wall, whatever the phrase is, or seeing what sticks, then of course you're going to burn out. Nobody knows what they're aiming for. Nobody knows how much they need to do. Everybody's just working for no apparent reason, just because it's work and we need to work and we need to just try and launch something, change to that. Yes, be agile, be able to adapt, move fast where possible, but let's always just move in line with the goal. I think that would be the main thing that's going to reduce overwhelm and overwork, is to always make sure you're working on something that has a purpose, that's moving you towards the thing that you're trying to get to. So that's number one. I think the retrospectives, like you brought up, they're another way to have that kind of like rest and reset button. It's like a closure of that loop. We get to understand what worked, what didn't work, and we get to understand what we would do better next time. If we don't do that and we fall into a trap, we're going to keep falling into the same trap. What that all the retrospective means is it's a meeting between every stakeholder in the project or even wider, but normally it can just be every person that was on the project. And we say, like I just said, what worked, what didn't work, what would we do differently, what were the lessons learned, and you look at, why it didn't work. And it's not blaming anyone. It's not saying it was my fault or their fault. It's looking at it from a team angle, a collective lens, and saying, how can we make sure that this doesn't happen again? Or how can we replicate it if it went absolutely amazingly? So that's a great way to just have that pause, close the loop, and do better next time. I think communications guidelines are a big one that sometimes get overlooked because it's not some like tool or tech, but it's actually very simple. If a company has communication guidelines in place, which means they give expectations as to how we expect you to communicate in this company. And again, this isn't like strict, rigid rules. It's just setting expectations on you can work whatever hours you choose, but please always make sure that you at least acknowledge a Slack message with an emoji, for example. I mean, obviously not right away if you're not in those working hours, but what that means is you're not expected to be online every hour that your manager's online, and you're not expected to give a big thought out answer to every Slack message that they send you. But what would be expected if you could just like it or emoji it, so we at some point, so that we know that it hasn't gone into the abyss. And then when you're online, or when you're ready, or when you've collected your thoughts, you come back and give an answer. And I think this has been a really big one, because I've worked in companies where they have expected that. It's really expected that you give an answer to everything as soon as you see it, and it's just not feasible or necessary, in my opinion. Especially right now when everybody's working across different time zones in different schedules. But there needs to be some kind of guideline around that, which says, we expect you to acknowledge a message and then respond in your own time. And maybe you've got a time frame within that. Maybe it's within a 24-hour period. Or again, you can have this, if it's a client-facing role, you can have this with client service expectations. Make sure you're speaking to your clients within a certain time frame. Because I think these kind of things, if you leave things like this to chance, people either think that they have to do this crazy overworking thing because they think that's how things are done. They probably worked in a company that had to do that before, and if you didn't do it, your manager got mad. Or maybe they don't bother to have the thought process around acknowledging or over communicating, and so things go unsaid, and then the manager is going to have to pull them up, and maybe there's feedback that needs to be given, and then that can also spiral because people can get anxiety and or defensive around feedback or around performance reviews. So I think to set these guidelines from the get-go, this is the tool we use for this, and this is how we use it, this is how we communicate in this situation, and this is the expectation of communication that's expected. And I really think that I always think if you can just relieve a lot of room for worry and room for guesswork and room for rumination. This is what causes a lot of anxiety in a lot of people. People don't know where they stand. They don't know how you want them to act. So they either act in a way that's either too far this way or too far that way. And it just causes people so much anguish and anxiety. So I do think that's a great tool to have, just very simple expectations around what's expected to stop overthinking. And then, of course, you've got actual tools like your PM tool. How do you use that properly? Is everybody using it properly? And then, of course, the tools that you mentioned about, movement. So even movement, we're energetic beings. So any kind of stored up energy, normally for me, if I get anxiety, it's in my chest, or if I'm stressed, it's in my shoulders. And it's so noticeable now that I'm aware of my own triggers and I'm aware of how my system works. I'm breathing shallow, my breathing goes shallow, or I'm sitting like this. But if you just take a second, it's just a reminder every time you get onto a call or every time you open your laptop, okay, how am I to relax my shoulders, calm down my breathing, even just like moving your body in any way, like a dance or a shake. It really does move the energy through your body, and it really can alleviate so much stress over worry and anxiety and overworking.
Yeah, now I have this interesting vision that management process is kind of, if we imagine like life is like a river, yes, or a float of energy, yes, there are specific points where we should concentrate our focus on, and this can be, for example, opening and closing cycles in our deadlines and retrospectives, and same things can be small daily rituals. For example, before opening laptop, yes, you come back to your body, you start feeling your breathing, yes, just to understand. And these small micro rituals make you really more better in all your performance. Some people have this more natural based, but some people need to develop that. And if we notice that we don't really feel well, yes, and our work, of course, sometimes it means that you need to go to doctor because something can be wrong
Yeah.
with yourself. But sometimes it just means that you're not really regulated well. And this is not related to doctor specifically. Yes, it's more related to your daily habits. Even for myself working in healthcare, I know that sometimes people say that 50% is about health behavior control and 50% is about medicine. So medicine is only like half part of your health journey. And talking about burnout, yes, and related to our managing of the team, we should understand, yes, that we are not robots, we're not like numbers in our applications, yes. We can be measured by these numbers, we can try to measure this, but still we are much more deep, yes, processes. So I think little by little we can make some conclusion for our podcast today. And I would like to ask you one last question is what's one thing most CEOs get wrong about preventing burnout? Like what they, no, maybe not one, maybe a few things, what you think they really not understanding about burnout, and maybe it's not directly connected. And can
I
you make some
think,
advice for other CEOs and project manager?
yeah, I can. I think that I think similar to what you've just said, and I don't think we get it wrong, but just to remember that operations is really about people. It really is because it's not, yes, it's about systems and processes and tech and all of these, even the strategic operations and all of these plans and goals. Yes, that's all very well and good, but actually at the end of the day, operations is really a people thing, in my opinion. So if you're not protecting or looking after or thinking about the people on the team, you can put all of these workflows and processes in place that you want. But if people aren't following them correctly or haven't got the capacity to follow them, or they are overworked or burnt out or stressed and unable to understand what it's all for, then you've lost anyway. So I think to understand not only the operation things that I've just mentioned, but understand the people that you're working with and the mindsets of the people that you're working with and the internal systems of the people that you're working with. I think that's the winning combination. And it's something that maybe you didn't get into operations realizing that it's such a people-based role. But I think at the end of the day, it really is because people are what make up most businesses. Now, certainly, maybe in the future, I don't know. But yeah, I think it's just to remember that it's a people game. And if you can't understand and be aware of the mindsets and the operating system of the person, then you only get so far.
Yeah. True, yes, and we should still, I think, even in the age of AI technologies, there should be someone who will control AI technologies, and these people still people, and they still will work with other people who control other AIs. So still, we will not go out totally from our cycle of human to human interconnection, even in future. And still, we need to develop our communication skills. We need to develop our empathy skills, yes,
Yeah.
which are so important and we sometimes forget about them because we're too much in these deadlines as operation leaders and feeling all the weight of the project and that people can lose money if we don't get a success and if we don't get a success this can be risk of and so on and so on. Yes, this is all true and we need to explore the deadlines as well, but as we talked today, it's more holistic, it's more broader picture that we should be aware of if we really want to take the system under control, if we want to it to be productive. Last thing, like imagine that some young project manager starting to listen to us, and I don't know, maybe he is already starting to notice that operations is more hard than he thought, and too many things to consider, how to learn this all. Maybe you can just, I don't know, name a few things that you start from first of all, if you're like only young project manager who plan to become like CEO in the future.
Um, ensure that clear expectations, which I think I've said a million times in this conversation, but it's so key. Clear expectations, ensure that you're focusing on the right things, having the correct team in place. So making sure that the right people are doing the right thing, and that's also expectations and performance is measured there. And also I think a key one is don't just do things because that's the way that it's always been done. Don't just do things for the sake of it, you know, like, oh, we follow this path, or we follow this framework, or we always have 1 hour meetings on a Monday, but then it turns out that they're pointless meetings. But no one's got the authority or the responsibility or the initiative to say, like, guys, this is just stripping us of energy instead of giving us energy. This could now be done on a these updates could be done on a PM software, for example. Why are we doing this? Because I think that's such a killer of it's such a zapper of energy, and an addition, a thing that adds to overwork is when people just go through motions just because that's the way it's always been done and nobody questions it. Is this still the most efficient way of doing it? And is it actually getting the results that we're looking for? No, but it was written in the handbook and it was on this process, and I don't know, like, it's just been done in this way, this business, for all these years. But it's like, okay, but let's just change that. Let's just make it a little bit more efficient and stop doing things just because they've always been done. Let's just be a bit more curious and question things and just try and be a bit more advanced and efficient in that sense.
Thank you so much. It was Katie Bray, and our podcast was Overlap, Overwork, Overload, Project Management Without Burnout. Thank you so much, Katie.
Thank you, Yi.
It was our podcast for Mental Growth Network. And see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.